Gospel of the Lord according to the book of Mark.
Praise to you, Lord.
Now when the Pharisees and some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem gathered around Jesus, they noticed that some of his disciples were eating with defiled hands, that is, without washing them. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they thoroughly wash their hands, thus observing the tradition of the elders. And they do not eat anything from the market unless they wash it, and there is also many other traditions that they observe, the washing of cups, pots, and bronze kettles. So the Pharisees and the scribes asked him, "Why do your disciples not live according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands?" He said to them, "Isaiah prophesied rightly about you hypocrites, as it is written, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. You abandon the commandments of God and hold to human tradition.'" Then he called the crowd again and said to them, "Listen to me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside a person that by going in can defile, but the things that come out are what defile. For it is from within, from the human heart, that evil intentions come: fornication, theft, murder, adultery, avarice, wickedness, deceit, licentiousness, envy, slander, pride, folly. All of these evil things come from within, and they defile a person." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord.
Please join in reading responsibly Psalm 15. Lord, who may dwell in your tabernacle? Who may abide upon your holy hill?
Those who lead in sight, who look back, who speak the truth from their hearts.
They do not slander with the tongue. They do no evil to their friends. They do not cast discredit upon a neighbor.
In sight, wicked are rejected, but they honor those who fear the Lord. They have sworn on my behalf, and none takes back their word.
They do not give their money in hope of gain, nor do they take bribes against the innocent. Those who do these things shall never be overthrown. Our second reading comes from the book of James, chapter 1. Every generous act of giving with every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change. In fulfillment of his own purpose, he gave us birth by the word of truth, so that we would become a kind of first fruits of his creatures. You must understand this, my beloved. Let everyone be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger, for your anger does not produce God's righteousness. Therefore, rid yourselves of all sordidness and rank growth of wickedness, and welcome with meekness the implanted word that has the power to save your souls. But be doers of the word, and not merely hearers who deceive themselves. For if any are hearers of the word and not doers, they are like those who look at themselves in the mirror. For they look at themselves and, on going away, immediately forget what they were like. But those who look into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and persevere, being not hearers who forgot, but doers who act, they will be blessed in their doing. If any think they are righteous and do not bridle their tongues, but deceive their hearts, their religion is worthless. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this: to care for orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained by the world. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
This morning we are continuing our summer worship series, Great Stories of the Bible, where we look at those famous stories that we often read as children, but we re-examine them as adults, seeing how they can help shape our own faith and relationship with God. This week's story is about Jonah. And before I read from Jonah chapter 4, I want to summarize the first 3 chapters of Jonah, or the story so far. Jonah is a righteous man. He's a God-fearer. He follows God. He's the kind of guy you want your child to marry. He's a guy that's everything's in order in his life. And he's the guy that everybody else looks up to. One day, God tells him, I want you to go to the city of Nineveh, and I got a message you. I want you to preach to them. Nineveh is basically the Las Vegas of the day. It's a large city, very wealthy, very hedonistic. It's a pleasure kind of city where people go to have a good time. It's a multicultural city, and it's a city of mostly, exclusively foreigners, non-Jewish people who do not worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Right away, Jonah has a very negative reaction to this command from God, and so he runs in the opposite direction. The exact opposite direction, gets on a ship and tries to, run away from what God has told him. His life, his disobedience, basically God says, no, I'm going to force you to do what I need you to do and what you need to do. And so a storm comes along, and basically he gets tossed overboard on a ship. He lives in the belly of a fish for 3 days. Finally he repents and he prays to God, and he goes to Nineveh and he preaches there, and everybody there repents and they begin to worship God. Jonah does not like this outcome. And so we pick up the story from that point in Jonah chapter 4. This change of plans greatly upset Jonah, and he became very angry with God. So he complained to the Lord about it. Didn't I say before I left home that you would do this, Lord? That is why I ran away to Tarshish. I knew that you are a merciful and compassionate God, slow to get angry and filled with unfailing love. You are eager to turn back from destroying people. Just kill me now, Lord. I'd rather be dead than alive if what I predicted will happen. The Lord replied, isn't it so right for you to be angry about this? Then Jonah went out to the east side of the city and made a shelter to sit under as he waited to see what would happen to the city. And the Lord God arranged for a leafy plant to grow there, and soon it spread its broad leaves over Jonah's head, shading him from the sun. This eased his discomfort. Jonah was very grateful for that plant. But God also arranged for a worm the next morning at dawn to eat through the stem of the plant so that it withered away. And as the sun grew hot, God arranged for a scorching east wind to blow on Jonah. The sun beat down on his head until he grew faint and he wished to die. Death is certainly better than living like this, he exclaimed. Then God said to Jonah, is it right for you to be angry because the plant died? Yes, Jonah retorted, I'm angry enough to die. And the Lord said, you feel sorry about that plant, but you did nothing to put it there. It came quickly and died quickly. should I not be concerned about Nineveh, the great city, in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know their right hand and their left? The word of the Lord. So here we have the story of Jonah, and the first question that everybody asks whenever we read the story is this really true? Come on! A big fish, a whale in the Mediterranean Sea. It literally doesn't say whales, it's just a big fish. How in the world is this guy going to survive for 3 days? Come on, this is unreal. And then the whole discussion about Jonah stops there. Now, the reality is we don't know. Is this a real historical story? Did this really happen? Or is it a parable? You know parables, right? They're made up stories, illustrations that Jesus used to prove a point to his disciples to kind of get them to change their way of thinking, their way of understanding and looking at the world. It is possible that Jonah is just a parable. And it's possible that it's a historical story. It's possible because it's a story based on miracles. It's a story where God is intervening in the world and creating what couldn't naturally happen to happen. Now, just like the other stories, like the story of Noah and a couple other that we've examined this summer, whether or not it's historical or a parable, actually, it doesn't matter. The story still has meaning, and it's a story that was repeated for generation after generation. In fact, on the holiest day of the year, Yom Kippur, this is the story that historically is read in the synagogues. Why? Because it's a story about you and I, about our faith and our relationship with God. And it's about a story about the heart of God. And it has important truths that should shape our relationship with God. So we can look past whether or not, and not get bogged down in whether or not it's a historical story or just a parable, and examine and look for what is it that God is trying to say to us through this story. It begins with Jonah, a righteous person, a person very similar to you and I, getting a command from God. Just go to the city and tell them, judgment's coming. This is what happens when you don't know God, when you live your life apart from God. And Jonah refuses. He can't do this because he knows what's going to happen. He knows that God's going to relent. He knows that God's going to have compassion and forgive these people. And gosh darn it, these people don't deserve to be forgiven. They're those sinners, those people who are like, you know those kinds of people, right? It's them. It's the people we can't stand who are different than us, who live apart from God, who say God's name in vain every other chance that they get, and say things just to get on our nerves. And they live for pleasure and for themselves. They don't deserve God. They don't deserve compassion and forgiveness. I deserve those things. That's what Jonah is saying, and he runs away. And so God has to orchestrate things to bring Jonah back. One of the first big lessons we learned from this story, and it's a lesson we've seen several times this summer, so I'm going to be a little repetitive here. When Jonah runs away and gets on that ship, a storm comes, and God's using that storm to bring Jonah back, but the innocent sailors and the owner of that ship are going to suffer. You see, in order to try and survive that storm, they throw, first Jonah openly tells them, hey, by the way, the storm's coming because God's judging me, and I'm sorry, it's best for you just to throw me overboard. And they refuse. They're horrified. These are non-Jewish people, but they say, God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, we're not going to do this to you because it's just wrong. So the real moral person here is the people who don't believe in God. But as Jonah tells them, just throw me overboard, they refuse, and they throw every single thing in the ship, the entire cargo, overboard. And this is the truth here. Once again, we see our disobedience causes other people to suffer. Other people get swept up in the consequences of our sinful actions. And that's what happens with Jonah. Jonah sins, and other people suffer. And that happens all the time. We've talked about that in every story, it seems like, this summer. It's a truth that repeats itself over and over and over again. And that's what happens in this story. God is going to move Jonah back to Nineveh because that's what Jonah needs. And other people get swept up in the disobedience of Jonah. We never live, and we don't live in an isolated world. Our actions are never, ever just about us. Secondly, is that when storms come, when life is turned upside down, when everything is broken and nothing is working, what does Jonah do? He finally prays. And prayer was key to him reconnecting to God. We saw this with David. We saw this with last week with Esther. We saw this with Abraham and his son, Isaac. We saw this over and over again. When people are desperate, they pray. And that's okay. That's a good thing. Because God responds whenever we pray. Prayer is not a magic wand. Jonah does not use prayer to magically poof himself out of the whale or out of the big fish or whatever he is. He doesn't wave prayer around to change the circumstance of his life. But what prayer does, we saw this so wonderfully last week, is that prayer helps Jonah to see. And what does Jonah see as he prays? As he hits rock bottom, or fish bottom, if you want to say. As his life is torn apart, he prays. And what does the prayer lead him to? It helps him to see his need to repent and change his ways. It doesn't wipe away the circumstances of his life. It doesn't stop the suffering, actually. But prayer is a powerful way that changes his way of thinking. And that's why prayer is so important, because it always reconnects us to God. Jonah then, after he hits rock bottom and he prays, he leads into repentance, he gives in and he does what God originally called him to do. He goes to this great, powerful, hedonistic pleasure palace of the city, Nineveh, and he preaches the word of God. And as a result, unbelievable happens. Those people who had never even given God a thought or a second, an idea or any kind of, they had never even considered that God might be real. To them, God was just a fantasy. These people repent and begin to tear down their places of idol worship. They begin to tear down the evil things that they do. The destructive forces are defeated, at least for a time. The people turn and begin to worship and repent. It's a wonderful story. It's like an unbelievable story. It's the kind of story we should be living for. But instead of Jonah rejoicing, Jonah becomes angry. He becomes angry to such an extent. He's so beside himself that he wanders out of the city into the desert, sits down, and he basically decides, I want to die. I'd rather die than live in a world where those ungrateful, unworthy people are allowed to experience the grace of God. This is the attitude that Jonah has. As a result, God has a conversation with Jonah. And that's the story that we read. It's the interaction between God and Jonah, where God is basically going to try and straighten Jonah out. One of the most important things about this story, like I said, is not that we get caught up in this argument or this discussion about whether or not a person can actually survive for 3 days in the belly of a fish. It's whether or not the spirit of Jonah actually lives inside of us. You see, the spirit of Jonah, we see it in two powerful examples in the story. The first one is this. Jonah is a racist. He has a heart and a worldview and a way of thinking that's filled with prejudices. He doesn't believe that those people over there are worth it. He doesn't believe that they're worthy of God's grace. He doesn't believe that they're really nice people at all. And but this is the thing. He's never met those people. He never has been to Nineveh. He never would have gone there. He never would have talked to them. He never would have touched them or interacted with them. Why? Because it's against the law. It's against Jewish custom and law to interact, especially with those kinds of people, because they're the wrong sorts of people. And so Jonah really doesn't know who these people are. He doesn't know their hearts. He knows who God is. He knows that God is a God of compassion and grace, and that if given a chance, God will forgive every single person. So he knows what God will do. But he doesn't know those people. He doesn't know the Ninevites. He doesn't understand them. He doesn't get to them. He's never walked in their shoes. And he certainly doesn't love them. And so he is a racist. He's prejudiced. He has all of these stereotypes in his mind about who they are and what they deserve and whether or not they'll really repent and whether or not they really deserve to have God in their lives. And so he's going to drag his feet and he's going to be angry because they get to have a powerful experience of God and they haven't earned it. That is prejudice. That's racism. That is the spirit of Jonah. And we should be worried whether or not that spirit lives inside of us, because it is so easy for Christians, and Christians do this all the time. They adopt this spirit of thinking of other people through stereotypes, through what they hear on CNN, on Fox News, through the propaganda that's so easily distributed through social media and through cable news networks. They judge and they regard people not based on actual experience with them, but based on tropes and stereotypes and all the stories that we hear. first part of the spirit of Jonah. The second part of the spirit of Jonah is maybe even more insidious than the racism and the prejudice that he has, because it is so prevalent but yet unseen in our hearts. And it's this. Jonah is partially upset, not because they don't deserve God or because they're unworthy of God, because they've lived apart from God and they've sinned. He's also upset because they get to experience God and he doesn't in that way. You see, Jonah puts his spirituality or his experience of God ahead of the people of Nineveh. And this is the insidious part, the second part of the spirit of Jonah that we have to be very wary about, is when we think that our spirituality, our experience of God is more important than the experience that other people have. When we put our experience of God as foremost in our lives instead of helping others to experience God. Let me give you an example of this. And this is an example that I know is going to ruffle some feathers, but it's an example, please, just listen to what I say so you can understand it. Just recently, this is actually 2 years ago, a couple came to me, and they're not from this church. They have nothing to do with, they don't even live here in Rockford. But they were devout Christians, and they had a child who was gay, who was about to get married in a gay wedding ceremony. And they had told their child, we don't believe in that, we cannot go. It would be dishonoring to God. It would be wrong for us to go. And so it was tearing apart their family, because most of their family, which was devout Christians, weren't going to go. And so they came to me, and they were talking, sharing this with me. And it reminded me of the story of the baker in Colorado who refuses to make a wedding cake for a gay couple because it violates his own artistic religious beliefs. And in those two examples, we see the spirit of Jonah playing forth in our world. Now, I'm not trying to talk about gay marriage and whether gay marriage is right or wrong. I know there's a difference of belief in here, so please don't take that as what I'm saying here. But this is what I want us to see here and understand. For those parents not to go to their daughter or their son's wedding would be basically saying, we don't support you, we don't love you. And they're saying that somehow their experience of God is more important than their daughter's experience of God. And that Colorado baker is saying that my experience of my artistic wanting to do whatever I need to do to worship God is more important than your experience of God. They are putting their spirituality above that of other people. Our gospel for today that we read, Jesus confronts this spirit when he says, what goes into your body does not make you pure or holy. It's what's in your heart. Your outward action is not going to make you more holy or less holy. It's what's going on inside your heart. It's how you love and think towards people that's so important. Jonah was a righteous man. He loved God, he worshiped God, he obeyed the law, and he had to disobey the law on so many fronts when God told him to go to Nineveh. He had to interact with people, he had to do things that were uncomfortable for him. His life had to be turned upside down just so that God could address his brokenness, his racism. But God also had to change who Jonah was. Why? Because Jonah thought that his experience of God, his righteousness, his worshiping of God could not be impeded for the sake of other people. And we see that in the church so often. When people take their own, they're so concerned about how they worship God and how they experience God, they don't realize that they're causing other people to suffer by insisting on being so narrow-minded and focused on how I'm going to experience God. It's really kind of a selfish way of thinking and worshiping God. Especially when our actions and being devoted to God build barriers between people who don't believe in God coming to know the power of forgiveness and grace. The spirit of Jonah is alive and well in the church, and that's what we have to be afraid of. That's what we need to be concerned about, not whether or not it's possible for a man to live 3 days in the belly of a fish. One more story, one more truth that we have to touch on here, and it's this. Harley Sheffield was a guy none of you have heard of by that. He was infamous for just one moment in his life for about 15 minutes. Back in 1986, when the Olympics were being held in Atlanta, they were doing the Olympic torch rally. You know what this is, right? Where they, a year before the Olympics, they light a torch in Greece someplace, and then it travels around the world. And people carry it, and they run, and it's a big deal to be a person that gets to carry the torch just for a little bit. And it travels all around the world, and when it got to America, it traveled across the country, crisscrossed several times. I don't remember just how far, but it takes a year for that torch to finally arrive in Atlanta. And it opens the big, you know how it opens at the Olympics, right? Someone carries it in, they light the big cauldron with this torch. It's been lit for an entire year. Well, Harley is his name. Harley was carrying the torch across Washington State, and he was crossing a bridge, and it was a little wet, and he fell. He stumbled and he fell. And he drops the torch, and the torch goes out. And all of a sudden, he's horrified. "Oh my God, I've ruined everything," he said. "Now we have to start over." He was just overwhelmed. Excuse me. He was just overwhelmed. It just happened. What do we do? And the officials that are, going alongside him in the van, they stop the van, they get out, and they're like, "Don't worry, it's okay." And they pick up the torch that's gone out, and they go back into the van, and they open it up, and there's another flame in there, and they relight the torch. They go, "It's okay, we got it back up here, it's okay." And they relight the torch, and they give it back, and they help him get back up. And tears are flowing down his face at this point, either in shame because of what he did, or joy because he didn't ruin everything. And he gets back up, and he starts to run again. And this is part of the story of Jonah that's so important, is that God, although he's incredibly concerned about the city of Nineveh, he's equally concerned about Jonah. And God is incredibly patient with Jonah. And no matter how far Jonah runs away, God is still going to chase him down. And God's going to say, "No, I'm going to do a work in your life. I'm going to do a work through you, and I'm going to do a work in you. And you are valuable to me. Enough so that I might turn your life upside down, shake the tree a bit, so that you understand how your own prejudices and racism is corrupting your experience of me. I love you enough," God says to Jonah, "to walk out to a desert with you, have a conversation with you, when you're so depressed that you decide that it's better to die than allow people to experience my forgiveness and grace." Talk about a horrible sentiment. God still loves Jonah well enough and deep enough that God's not going to give up on Jonah. And God's not going to give up on me. And God's not going to give up on you. No matter what mess we've made in our lives, God does not give up. He doesn't give up on the city of Nineveh and all the people that are hedonistic and have ignored him all of their lives. And God does not give up on Jonah, the person who runs away from him. God is a gracious and loving Father. And that is an incredible truth that we can hold on to. Amen? Amen. Our takeaways for today, remember, our takeaways are the basic biblical truths that we encounter, that we can hook our faith on and take home with us. The first one is this: Jonah had to leave his home and overcome a major prejudice in order to preach to Nineveh. God had to basically turn Jonah's life upside down, create upheaval in Jonah's life in order to challenge and change this prejudice that was in Jonah's heart that was corrupting his experience of God. The second takeaway: our concern should not be whether a man can live inside of a fish, but whether the spirit of Jonah lives inside of us. And then the last one, and I added this on at the last second. And this is just the last verse in the book of Noah. This is how the book of the book of Jonah, the book of Jonah ends. Should I not be concerned about Nineveh, that great city, in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know their right hand from their left? It's a powerful sentiment to end this story on. And it's one of those truths that we need to take hold of, take home with us, and understand that God really is concerned with all those people who do not know God. Let's stand for our song today.